Oh, AP's ready. All right, let's go. All right. Hello, everyone. I waited a respectful amount of time for you to click on the button, AP. How do you like that?
You
It
know,
was pretty
Philip,
instantaneous.
it's only taken what 3 years for you to learn. Hold off for like 3 seconds so people can get rid of the annoying little window at the top when you start recording.
I
Three
only
years.
I only did it because Evan is here, so you
I
know.
was very nervous actually, but it was much easier than I thought. It was really fun.
He makes it look very hard, I know. So,
I hate you, Philip.
hello, everyone. Welcome to a discussion of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I am joined here by two excellent people. One is, of course, the Nemesis himself, Dr. A.P. Canavan, otherwise known as Professor Fireballs, or a critical dragon, whichever you like. All of the above. He'll answer to anything, right, AP?
I, I answer to a lot of things, not anything. Uh, Given that I've overheard some of the things that my students call me.
Oh, no. Well, I'm sure it's all meant in a loving way.
You haven't met my students.
So- and we are also joined by Evan, whose channel is Nerdwriter 1. And Evan has recently finished reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen and wanted to chat with us because I don't know why. Why would you want to chat with us, Evan?
Well, I mean, you're joking, but it is an honor to be here with you guys for real.
Oh.
In terms of the Malazan YouTube community, you guys must know that you are a very special part of that. It's a big, friendly, generous community. And I'm just going to embarrass you for just 20 seconds and say what I said on the comment of your video, Philip, earlier, which is that you both really helped me uh, through my first read through of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and that those videos that you guys made were just amazing supplements to the reading experience. It made it more interesting. You showed me things I didn't see, and you made it more fun. You
Oh.
made you made me think about the series on my own, and I think the books themselves encourage that. They linger in a really kind of unique way, I think. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I know I speak for a lot of people. And quickly, can I also just say that there are lots of other Malazan YouTubers, and I just want to just name a couple because they were also really helpful. But Ruth and Bad and Jimmy Nuts, Joanna Reeds, Iskar Jarak, Niffelrog, Andy Smith, Jeff and Lana at DLC Book Club, who are doing a read through right now, Shay from Zachary Shay, and Books with Banks. And I'm missing a lot of people. But I watched all your videos about Malazan, I'm sorry. And no fireballs, please. And I, and the same thing applies. It is a really, really great, generous, welcoming community
Hmm.
for someone who's coming in from the outside, and we all benefit from it.
Well, thank you so much. And I agree with you 100% about all those other people. It's a wonderful community and we all learn together. The conversations have been my favorite part of this whole journey, really. When I did my reread along with this guy over here, it was just such a tremendous thing. It was a fantastic experience. And I also had the privilege of talking with others like Joanna and Jimmy and Alan and many other people. And it's just this is a series. These are series that allow many conversations and discussions. That it is conducive to rereads and deep dives, and this is one of the things we love about Malazan. So it's a joy to be able to talk with people and to be able to chat with you today, Evan. So yeah, AP, you want to say
And
something?
first of all, thank you very much. And I think one of the things that Philip and I and a lot of other people have always tried to do, it's always to encourage conversation,
Hmm.
not shut it down.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's a little antithetical to how social media and the internet works, that it's all about the definitive, this is the thing, and you shut down everything else. But the joy of literature is the room to explore concepts and conversations and to look at things from multiple angles. And there's one thing, Evan, that you said that I would disagree with. You weren't coming in from the outside. all of these conversations are inclusive of everyone. There is no outside inside. That this is readers, and you are part of that community. You are not on the outside of something and coming in. You are part of it from the very, very beginning. And that is the joy of great conversation about literature. That there is no outside, there is no inside, there is no inner circle. It's a discussion of things that we love, things that we enjoy, even in my case, things that annoy me. But just because they annoy me doesn't mean that, other people should be annoyed. It's we have conversations, we have these points of view, and we share them. And that's what the community is. It's not exclusatory in any way. It's inclusive. And that would be the only point that you raised that I would kind of push back a little tiny bit on, because I think people can formulate ideas that fandoms, because they're passionate, are in some way a clique and you have to break your way into it. There's not that. Fandoms are great about accepting any and all. That they there are always members of a fandom that will be issues. But that's the nature of fandom.
But Malazan as a fandom is, I think, maybe not uniquely, but it is a very welcoming fandom.
Hmm.
Without much of that kind of gatekeeping that you see in some other fandoms, which I won't name. But it's been just great. I mean, just being on the Reddit subthread and reading the wiki and all. There's so many resources, and I've just enjoyed all of it. Now after what you said, AP, I feel welcomed. I feel welcomed into the community. I think also too because there's not many people in my life, who read fantasy. And so I look online for those communities. Actually, I did do the Malazan Book of the Fallen as a buddy read with a friend as a way to connect. We haven't been living in the same city for years, and it was an amazing experience for that reason too. But he's really the only friend I have who reads as much fantasy as I do. So I think the communities I see are ones that are mostly, online and across the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
The one good thing about modern technology, we get to have these conversations, we get to share.
Completely.
The bad thing is, uh, there are a lot of people whose opinions maybe we don't necessarily want to hear that we end up getting as well. But it's the give and take. It's the cost of the joy that we get in connecting with others.
Yeah, indeed. Well said. But we will be moving on now to the discussion. Full spoilers for the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So if you have not read the Malazan Book of the Fallen, you may not want to hear what we have to say because we're going to spoil big things all the way through the Crippled God. No spoilers for any series outside of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. No spoils. I could see that on you're just about to come out of your mouth.
Which I haven't read, so that's good.
Right. So please do not
but intend to.
Yep. So Evan has not yet. So please don't in the comments spoil anything from the other series. And you can name them, but don't spoil anything from the other series.
Frodo destroys the ring.
AP. Oh, come on.
That's too hot. That fireball was too hot.
Beowulf kills a dragon.
Philip, how could you? You spoiled Beowulf for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. Well, this is mainly going to be, we're going to go wherever we feel like, because that's what we do. But this is mainly going to be a structural conversation. How does the structure of the Malazan Book of the Fallen influence our experience of it? And how does reaching the end of the series in the Crippled God change, recontextualize what comes before? I think we probably ought to talk about, have at least a portion of this conversation dedicated to Toll the Hounds, specifically the cipher, which I know AP would be great at talking about as well. The cipher for the series, as Stephen Erikson himself has labeled it. But yeah, we're just going to talk about this, and this is something that Evan brought to us as a kind of a discussion topic. And Evan, you had some specific things during your experience of this series that prompted the desire to talk about the structure in particular. So you want to talk about that for a little bit before we get into the details?
Sure. So we're full spoilers for Malazan Book
Full
of the Fallen, right?
spoilers. Yep.
Okay. So Kamensad wrote the series.
Yep.
I hope you clicked away.
Boom. Yeah.
um, that was such a mind-blowing and very satisfying ending to the series for me, and it made me think so much about the entire 10 books that I just read. And the thing that I would love to start with in regards to that, because I think the decision there is so brilliant by Erikson, but I would love to start with narrative levels. I know that's like maybe people are clicking away.
No, because they want to hear
But
AP talk about this. They definitely,
okay.
yeah.
Because I spent, what else are you going to do on a nice Wednesday night? But I spent uh, an hour, I'm not going to say how long, doing a concentric circle graph of the narrative levels in Book of the Fallen. And actually have I have it, and I want to share it to the
Oh,
screen
good,
and see.
good.
I
Good.
want to see if I got this right. Now, this is a simplified one. Okay, so AP, I just want to let you know that I did have one with implied authors and implied readers and stuff. And even though that sort of that strained my brain a little bit, I think there is usefulness to that. But in terms of the conversation that I want to have, I don't think it's necessary for
Just want to
the
prepare. AP is going to unleash some fireballs here. So,
please
No,
unleash the fireballs. Okay, so here I'm sharing it right now. So do we see this?
yeah.
So let me know if this is correct. So basically, this is the way that I see the series coming out of it. Um, hold on one second here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So basically, what you have is, and I don't know if you can still see me on the screen or not.
I do. We can
Uh,
see you in the little tiny corner.
yeah.
yeah. So this is Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. Stephen Erikson would be the real author, and Erikson would be the implied author. But let's just assume that they're the same for this. So this is the book we're holding in our hand. But what's inside this book
Hmm.
is a found manuscript or book of the Book of the Fallen. Now, we don't know who wrote it until the very, very end. But I think, for me, the opening poem and the final poem, to me, the opening poem reads kind of like an invocation to the muses type thing. So I would assume that's in the found manuscript. So we have that. We don't know who wrote it. Now, the author or authors of that, which I want to talk about, choose a third person limited narrator to tell a history in the form of a story. And that's something I also want to talk about, because this tension between history and fiction and story, I think, is something that Erikson is really interested in getting us to think about. That narrator is speaking to a narratee, and the fictional reader of the Book of the Fallen are the people in the jade statues and the people from Kamensad's world, or really anybody inside the story world of Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. And
Hmm.
then outside of that is us, is me and you and anybody who's reading Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. Is that how does that sound?
Go, AP.
Well, this isn't actually narrative levels. Narrative levels is a different thing.
Okay.
But what you're talking about here, about this construction of the fiction and how
Yeah.
we interact with the fiction, like, this is a really good sort of model for it, because as you know, the author of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is Stephen Erikson, but Stephen Erikson is different from Steve London, the actual person,
Yes.
because each book is going to be written at a different point in Steve London's life. So there's this concept of Stephen Erikson, the author, as if this is an entity, but Steve London, who makes up that entity, but that entity has been constructed multiple times over multiple entries. So that's where you have that sort of construct of the implied author.
Yeah. I could show you my other graph.
I don't know, but this is really good because
Yeah.
you're focusing on the key elements. But I wanted to explain that distinction because sometimes people sort of it helps with the separation of art from artist and
Yeah.
all like death of the author and where people want to talk about that relationship between author and text. Quite often they skip the narrator part, and that's what you've identified here really brilliantly is at the end of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, it's implied that Kamensod has actually created this entire thing. And then from that, Kamensod does not include themselves as a homodiegetic narrator in the general sense that we use it. It's more heterodiegetic, focusing on this floating narrative position. And yeah, third person point of view. And the narrator appears to be limited, but now that you know that Kamensod is the narrator, it's actually an omniscient narrator
Hmm.
because there are moments in it where Kamensod gives the game away. I think there's one in, or a
Yeah.
couple in Midnight Tides, and maybe I think in House of Chains, where Kamensod says, and they did not know that this was going to happen, sort of thing. A line like that can only be known if you already know where the thing is going. So it's about the level of knowledge the narrator has, which is actually omniscient, but it's styled in a third person limited.
Okay. So
Does that
that's
make
something
sense?
it does. And it's something that I want to talk about as part of this conversation for sure, because I think it's super important thematically, actually, to the story. Um, but the first thing that I want to ask both of you is there's a choice on the first level, or there's a choice here where um, Erikson decides to make the Book of the Fallen the entirety of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So in The Lord of the Rings, in the prologue, you have, I think it's notes on Shire Reckoning, you have a kind of Tolkien stand-in construct person who's saying that what you're reading, or what you're going to read, is compiled from mostly the Red Book of Westmarch. Actually, it's like a copy of the Red Book of Westmarch, and also other sources that he compiled them and he translated them so that for us to read. And then you have in oh wait, can I wanted to say something about Gene Wolfe's work.
Book of
Is
the New
that
Sun. You can talk about the narrative style of it, but if it's a reveal about
yeah,
Siberian, you want
well,
to steer clear of that.
there's a certain something at the end of the books, which I won't say,
Okay, yeah.
that I find very funny and very hilarious. I think it
Uh-huh.
is just a really, really funny thing, but it's a similar. Well, I won't say anymore, and you can cut that out if it's going to spoil
No,
people.
it's fine.
But,
It's fine. Yeah.
but basically, you have in this story, what Erikson is doing is putting no space in between the the book that you're holding and the book that's inside the book, the in-world book. And I'm just curious for both of you what you think, by not having that kind of distance, what you think that what that choice does for the reader. Because I have some thoughts about it, but I'd love to hear what you think.
I have some brief thoughts, and then I'll hand it over to AP.
What a
Hey.
surprise. Your thoughts are brief.
Now, this
Brief.
is worth the price of admission. Now,
I think pithy is the word I would use. Pithy. Pithy. Anyway,
that's a
um,
character, I thought.
you did mention yeah, that's true, that is a character. You did mention the frame poems, the epigraph, and then the poem at the end. I think that's the closest that Erikson gets to what you're talking about with Tolkien's whole pose there, or Gene Wolfe's pose, which you get in more external matter, I guess, in a sense. I mean, it's like the appendices to Lord of the Rings, right? Where you really get that, or after each book of the in the Book of the New Sun, you get a little like note from the author kind of thing.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
find those so funny.
yeah.
I find them so funny. I think Gene Wolfe is brilliant, and I think that is a part of his brilliance.
I absolutely agree. And I think where Erikson gets closest to that is in those frame poems, but also even in the epigraphs within all 10 books, because those are often, if people pay close attention to those poems and those little excerpts from history, pseudo history books, that's also Erikson often, I think, kind of winking at the reader. So I don't know what AP thinks about all that, but I'll let AP give his more extensive answer.
There are a lot of different elements that sort of come together here. And again, this is one of the difficulties in talking about any of these subjects. We talk about one thing and people go, oh, well, that's the answer. And you go, well, actually, no, that's one thing that, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing, and they all combine. That's the complexity of narrative.
Yep. Yep.
But if we think about found manuscript texts in the first place, why was this a thing? And one of the reasons was by pretending it was a found manuscript,
We can
the
go back to this.
potentially the author could say, I didn't actually write this. This was a find, it's a sort of fig leaf to cover propriety.
Yeah.
Or it could be, I uncovered this, this revealed truth. And it gives it a sense of authenticity that this wasn't, I didn't write this. I found this. This was a thing that was created. And if you think even in when did the Blair Witch Project sort of come out in the cinema? But that idea of the found footage,
Yep.
that
Yep.
technique made that film scarier because it made it appear as if it was a real thing rather than a fictional construction. And so the concept of a found narrative gives, in some way, a sense of authenticity and weight to the found text. But that's up against reader expectation about what an epic fantasy is.
Hmm.
And so when you have a series like the Malazan Book of the Fallen and other Malazan works that are very much interested in, at least one of the things they're interested in, I think, is this perception of what is real, what is fact the same as real, because perception of reality is something that is slightly more malleable and flexible. And then how much of history is what happened, how much of history is what we actually understand of what happened, and how much of history is how it is presented and the different views. And that is in conversation with this creation of fiction and the faux realities created, these fictive universes and story worlds that are, in one sense, all lies.
Hmm.
It's all made up. None of it is true. And yet, at the heart of some of the greatest fiction we have is that it's actually using pretty lies to investigate these deeply important truths. And so, at the heart of all of these lies is actually truth. So, this, I suppose you could call it a postmodern deconstruction of perception of reality and the norm of the base norms and factual basis for things. That it's going for an investigation of truth through art, and so there's an entire meta conversation between the Malazan Book of the Fallen as fantasy, what the fantasy genre is, and what the purpose of literature and storytelling are.
Right.
And I think a lot of those elements work together. And so when you have something like this, where the perception of the narrative is that it is third person limited, and then you find out that actually it's an omniscient narrator presenting a third person limited
Yeah.
perspective, and then you find out that the omniscient narrator is unreliable. And suddenly, this idea of an unreliable omniscience, which is quite rare in a lot of writing, people typically don't go for this. It
Yeah.
because it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. But an unreliable omniscient narrator narrating a third person point of view for the most part in that limited fashion, focused for a lot of the time on the external reactions of characters, but it's only semi limited because we still do dip into characters' heads. We get characters' thoughts. And so there's a
That's
playfulness with this. And
yeah.
one of the reasons we know that this isn't simply sloppy writing, because people go, well, you have to stick to one. You have to be consistent. And If a narrative is inconsistent with its point of view control, you might point to that as an error, or an example of bad writing. But when we look at the sections in which these sorts of things happen, they are tied so specifically to these reactions or to reveal something to a reader, you can feel the level of intentionality of doing this because you don't keep to a rule for a rule's sake. The rule is there to describe an effect. And if you can achieve that effect or you want a different effect, that's when you make the rule flexible. Rules are a great place to start as a sort of fundamental, but we break rules when it does the thing if we know that we're breaking the rule and how we're breaking the rule and how breaking the rule will create a different effect.
Just to
And
add
so,
really quickly to what you're saying, AP, one of the hallmarks of the series as well is that you can drive yourself crazy trying to get the chronology exactly right, like pinning everything in place, and it doesn't work. There are contradictions, and that's because this is, in fact, a unreliable, omniscient narrator that we're dealing with here. That you can't, and people, believe me, have tried. You can go online and all kinds of attempts to get everything pinned down, and reading order, everything in the right place. You got to read from this book, this page, this to the page that, and then you got to go to this book, page this, and get everything in the right. You can't do it, really. It doesn't
But
work.
that's also, wouldn't that also be kind of a meta commentary on the difference between uh, the text and the story and being able to reconstitute the text as the chronological story?
Right.
Like, and I do think, AP, that I feel that everything's intentional when I'm reading, and so I feel very uh, like I have a trust in my reading experience. I think that's communicated to the reader in lots of ways. And for me, the this choice to not have that translator character for the found manuscript, to me, it kind of collapses the levels between the graph that I was showing you, where
Hmm.
we're invited to identify Kaminsad with Erikson, and we're invited to identify ourselves as the readers with the with the jade people in the jade statues, or the people in the story world of Malazan Book of the Fallen. And like there's something about that is slightly different. Like I try to think of alternatives to what could have been done. So he could have done the translator figure, and I think that puts a little bit of distance there. And so, like for me, I don't identify with the people who are reading the Red Book of Westmarch. Like there's a distance between me and them. And let's say he told the story straight without the framing device, then I don't really get this sense of, it's almost as if two positions are overlapping. The position of me, he's pulling in both directions, where you get the extra immersion from like this found manuscript thing. It makes you, but you also are being asked to consider the the perspective of readers and authors. So like that's the whole point of doing, I think, these levels, which is that you think about the constructions that authors make and the way that readers interpret. And there's this weird like overlapping sense where I am the jade, I am the people in the story world, but I'm also me outside the story world. I think I just that it's not something I fully put together as I was reading,
Hmm.
but it's something that I've thought a lot about afterwards. And it's an interesting, I just think as a choice, it's intentional, and it's an interesting feeling. Does that make sense?
yeah. Philip, do you want to talk about this or do you want to hear my thoughts first this time?
Go ahead. You go first this time.
One of the issues that gets addressed a lot in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is how limiting certainty is.
Mm.
If you think of those characters who have absolute positions and refuse to change, or the characters that don't consider the fact that it's more complex and there may be multiple ways to approach something. The Malazan Book of the Fallen is frequently posing questions with multiple valid answers and asking us to negotiate between them. And a lot of it is not trying to tell you this is how you must do it, but rather making the reader think, making the reader consider. and posing different scenarios. And so what you just identified, this idea of like, are we the people of this world? Are we the people in the jade statues? Well, okay, let's posit that. And you did exactly the thing that I think is a brilliant technique for all readers. If I change that one thing, what does it actually lead to? So if we get rid of the frame narrative and we're just left with what appears to be a um, secondary world epic fantasy series, what naturally changes? That ending with where Kamensod goes and the ramifications of this whole journey and what it means for outside of the world isn't signaled to the reader. By having that inclusion, it's yes, Kamisod has gone on a journey. This then is going to impact other worlds. What is the impact that Kamisod is bringing? Because now we have what is the reason this story is being told by this person who brought it to another world?
Mm.
Instead of, oh, here's a story. I've read the story. That was a really cool story. It's here's something that happened. It happened to one of the characters. They then felt that this whole sequence of events, all the things that they focused on, were important to relay, not just as a this is what happened, but important to teach something. And therefore, that implication is inviting the reader to start investigating what are the through lines? What are the concepts? Why does Kamensod think that the events that happened in this book are important enough to relay? It's not just that these things happened, because clearly Kamensod and any
Yeah.
author really has gone through and gone, I want to talk about this thing. I want to show you this thing because it's not that they actually happened.
And
Um,
that's where the collapsing of Erikson with Kamensod becomes
Hmm.
important.
Yeah.
Because if you're asking these questions about Kamensod, then you're also asking them about Erikson.
Yeah.
And
This is also
yeah,
where structure is so beautifully intertwined with themes, I think, how they support
yes.
each other, where you have these a kaleidoscope of perspectives on themes like compassion. And this is very much supported by this structure and by the time you realize, oh, Kamensad is the writer, is the creator of this story that we're getting. It completely changes your perspective on him, which is a big theme in there. How connecting with another being changes your perspective on that being. How former foes can become actually intimate with each other in ways that are actually breathtakingly beautiful and sublime. That's something that the series explores, and it's beautiful to me how the structure actually supports this exploration of theme that you get all these fascinating reveals, and it changes the way you feel about this character. Like, I thought Kamensad was a pretty bad dude. Now I'm
Yeah.
feeling for him at the end of all of this, realizing what he went through and that he's given us this story as a testament. And maybe it's not exactly what happened either, and he acknowledges that repeatedly throughout, right, by giving us all these examples of history and story being sometimes deliberate lies, sometimes unintentional lies, but on and on it goes. And I love how these things support each other.
Or the book itself, the Book of the Fallen, is not written solely by Kamensad. Because
No,
that's
you've
the other
got
thing.
Krupp in there, right? Yeah, yeah,
Well, but that's definitely true, and that's the next layer down.
yeah.
But the thing I think I saw this in a video that you guys did, but there is this idea that I find also interesting, which is that we don't know that this book inside the book is the original copy. And if you
Right.
think of it as like the Bible, because the opening poem, the we, the use of the word we in that poem,
Mhm.
I sort of imagine like in my sort of head, I imagine a, a, a church or a big, big Bible that has been maybe partly written by Kamensad, but over the years has been, things have been put in and taken out in order to fit the contemporary needs of whatever that culture is doing at the moment. It's never made, it's never clear. It's up to us to decide whether or not we think Kamensad is the sole author of this thing and he
Mm.
just left it there and it was never changed, or is it's an oil stained book, it's an old book. you know I that is to get thinking down those roads is just so fun and exciting to me.
Yeah.
And precisely that, the idea of a tome that is stained with age, so a religious text or a culturally important text that's been handed down, and you go, well, what if it got water damage? Oh, well, we fixed that and we did that and we changed that, and then the ink had started to fade, so we had a scribe come in. And Philip could tell you from his research into medieval manuscripts that the differences between certain copies, because
Oh yeah.
scribes may alter things, scribes may put the oh, I ran out of room there, and oh, they clearly meant to say this thing, and I'm
Yeah,
just going to
yeah, yeah.
change that. Or I can't quite read that word. I think it's this word. Um, that texts can get compiled over time and can be subtly changed over time, and it's a fascinating process. And again, goes to this perception of
Hmm.
what is true for the person reading it in that moment, what is true about what the person intended to communicate when they created it, and how much of that is true about what actually happened. That suddenly
Yeah.
there are these multiple levels of truth, understanding, and meaning. And it's playful. It's not insisting
Yes.
it must be, this is a factual thing that happened. When when we read Milton's Paradise Lost, we don't go, well, that's not exactly how it happened. When we read Dante's Inferno, we don't go, well, I don't think that that's historically accurate.
Well, you would know, AP.
Oh, wow. That's where the
And you
fireballs
see,
come from.
and you call me the evil one when we read The Lord of the Rings. Like people refer to Middle Earth as a secondary world. And but that whole thing about concerning hobbits places it in our world. This is the mythic prehistory of our world. It's not a
Yeah.
secondary world. It's not a different place altogether. And in fact, the reason humans don't see hobbits anymore is they've gotten very good at hiding. You know, it's meant to be our world. It's not a secondary world, except it is in the slightly different way than we understand it. But you have the same with the perception of fairy and moving through portals, or these thresholds to the underworld. The idea of creating a different place and space where there is a sufficient distance between the reader and the thing that is happening so that we don't have automatic knee jerk reactions, that we don't prejudge the situations, that we're actually trying to follow and understand character motivation, that we're trying to understand ramifications of actions outside of the real world context in which we live that may dictate a lot of those things. So, science fiction, fantasy, horror quite often use this space into the fictive realms in order to investigate complex and difficult things, to make us think about them deeper and ask those questions. And I think that's part of what you identified here, this the multiple levels of unreliable truth,
Hmm.
Yeah.
the multiple perceptions of it. That's a key aspect. And it's one of the things that I find so enriching about the series and also the work of Esselman. And Philip, like Steve and Cam have said that, or well, Steve at least said that, or sorry, I should say, Erikson has said that Cam and Sod was Cam
Totally.
referring to Ian C. Esselman
Yep.
and Sod deprecatingly referring to himself. And so even the construct of Kamansod, if we think of Kamansod, the crippled god, has been broken into pieces. Each of these pieces
Yeah.
has a different perception of the world.
Hmm.
And it's only
And
when
that's
some
multiple
of them are
authors.
drawn
Yeah.
together that we get this construction. And one of the authors had said that how he thought with and played with the concept of Kamansod is it's part him and part Ian C. Esselman, and they will invariably have different visions of the characters. They will have different visions of the events because although they agree X happened, it's like, but I remember it this way. Well, I remember it that way.
Yep.
It can be very contradictory or fairly complementary, but they're always going to be distinct. And Kamenso then ends up as this composite character that has a core, that has a heart, that has a soul and a spirit, but the different pieces have experienced the world differently and reflect all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this recontextualized the very title of the series. And you only realize when
Yeah.
you get to the end of the Crippled God what Malazan Book of the Fallen means. This is the fallen god, this Kamensad composite creature. I actually want to read the opening epigraph
Please.
so that we
Please.
can just hear it for people could follow along in their copies of Gardens of the Moon. But let's just read this thing because I think it really brings to light a lot of what we're talking about here. So now, and I can also do the Old English translation I did for Stephen
Oh,
Erikson.
I watched that and I loved it. I loved it.
We'll do that another time. All right, here we go. Now these ashes have grown cold. We open the old book. These oil-stained pages recount the tales of the fallen. A frayed empire, words without warmth. The hearth has ebbed. Its gleam and life's sparks are but memories against dimming eyes. What cast my mind, what hue my thoughts as I open the book of the fallen and breathe deep the scent of history. Listen then to these words carried on that breath. These tales are the tales of us all, again, yet again. We are history relived, and that is all. Without end, that is all. So again and again, we're getting
Yeah.
these different versions, this kaleidoscope of visions, and they may even be contradictory at points, but that's kind of part of the point, and the structure reinforces all of that, doesn't it?
So can I drill down into this because history is a word here that's really
Yes.
sticking out to me, and I want to drill down into that because I think these narrative things that we're talking about, like they have a thematic role, and that's to me what's so brilliant. And the role that I see is that, and I sort of mentioned this in the email that I wrote to you guys, which is that reading the series is a it's called difficult, but I sort of think of it as a challenging experience, and I like the challenge. And the challenge that I was faced with is not knowing what the shape of the story is until the very end. And I want to talk about that. But uh, there's this thinker that I really like, this book that I really like. I'm sure you know, Frank Kermode's The Sense of an Ending, and it's a really important bit of theory for me because it relates, I think, fictions to the importance of us in our life. It's not insular in terms of just literary criticism. But what he's essentially saying is that we're born, people are born in the middle of things, and there's this past that stretches before us, and there's this future that stretches in front of us, and we are made very uncomfortable by that because we don't know what our place is in that giant span. And so what we've done is we create fictions of beginnings and ends to join ourselves with the entire history. And it starts out as religious creation myths and apocalypse myths, and you can see the lives of human beings get significance if they play a role in the story. And I think that the other thing he says is that the other need we have is a need for truth and a need for facts, and those things come into contact. And so you just see this sort of narrowing of the focus. It's sort of similar to what Stephen Donaldson says in one of his essays on fantasy,
Uh-huh.
which is that we go from the epic to, well, we go from apocalypse to tragedy to the epic to chivalric romance to this modern state where fiction is much more about characters. And there's this anxiety about making characters not fit into plots like stock archetypal characters. And what I see in Malazan Book of the Fallen is a sort of way to reconcile those two things
Hmm.
in a really interesting way. Because one of the reasons I love Lord of the Rings and Tolkien is that it makes me feel like I have a part. To the extent that the immersion is successful, and I find it very successful, it makes me feel like I have a part in a larger story, and that part is an epic part.
Mhm.
It's not these provisional parts that we have in a lot of literary fiction, which I love and I read, but what fantasy is sort of brought back into the world, modern fantasy, is this epicness. Um, and when I read Malazan Book of the Fallen, I was very challenged by the fact that I don't understand what the shape of what I'm reading is, you know. And I'm going from book to book, and the character that really fixed on with me was Lacine, because he's clearly playing with this uh, evil queen trope, and I just kept expecting the story to move back into Malaz City or back into, Unta, I guess, where the story would contract and all the characters would, but the story itself, the books are telling me, this is not going to happen. But I'm not listening to that, because as much as fiction as fantasy fiction is marginalized, generally in society, it's marginalized in my brain. Like, I read literary fiction, I read stories that don't have these requirements, and yet I'm like holding these expectations for this series.
Hmm.
And at the point where I let go of that, the point where I let go of that, it was the same point where it's in the Crippled God, where they say that Lacine is dead,
Yeah.
and it's like this throwaway thing, and I'm like, we're not going to get a confrontation with her. Like, what's going on here? Although we did in book 6, but not the one that I was expecting. And then we we reach this final moment of, the series is so much about compassion and empathy and extending empathy to strangers. And the moment that I let go and extended my empathy to, saw the point of view of the crippled God, was the exact moment that the series became the point of view of the crippled God.
Yeah.
And that to me was mind blowing. Again, I didn't really get it right as I was reading, but it's the thematic thing where, going all the way back to Kermode, the ending of the series shapes the story,
Mhm.
because
Yes.
the story is the story of the people who work to free the crippled God.
Yep.
I'm rambling, but I mean,
Oh,
it was such a special experience. And then one level beyond that is that, what choice does the crippled God choose to be the narrator? It is the limited third person. It is him seeing into the point of view of the people on the ground.
yeah.
So it is just this extension of us extending our empathy and compassion into, like, what I sort of see as almost like an epiphany or a reward. The reward I got was not the one I was expecting, but it was the shaping of the entire series. It became the unity that I was looking for the whole time. I'll stop talking, but
You'll have
that.
you'll have further thoughts when you read Esselmont's novels of the Malazan Empire on
Yeah,
Lysine specifically, but I'll just say in a general sense that Esselmont also has a way of changing your perspective on characters you thought you knew from the
yeah.
Malazan Book of the Fallen, like Tayshran AP, for example. We've had discussions about Tayshran.
Yeah, because I've never forgiven Cam for making me like and understand Tayshran.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've never forgiven Etzel. I keep slipping into, because we were just having an informal chat. I keep slipping into referring them by first name. No, that Erikson and Esselmont, they're the authors. They should
Right.
always remember that. But Evan, you raised a really interesting point there about expectation of narrative patterning, not just narrative structure. Where people talk about, say, the hero's journey or Freytag's pyramid or the three-act structure or comedy and tragedy. All of these are different ways to discuss movement of narrative with an expectation of an end goal. And what's fascinating is, with the Malazan Book of the Fallen, there are so many signals over and over again that this is not the story you suppose it to be. It's not the narrative that you are expecting. It is undercut over and over and over again. And we stubbornly, because of our training and expectation of what is in the genre, how should epic fantasy function? How should a series function? And we forget serial is different to series. We
Mm.
just use the term series now to refer to any multi-volume narrative. And you go, but series and serial are actually different. And we keep imposing these expectations because this is what's happened before. Or it's we've read a bunch of these things, therefore how this is going to happen. But as you point out, this concept of closure and the natural conclusion of a narrative cycle, which once you understand the how something is ended and you understand what the important points were, you can retrospectively look over the entire thing and you will see it in a new light. And not every author plays with that
Hmm.
because, particularly in the modern day, a lot of readers, myself included, we like things that we already understand. Oh, look, it's a chosen one. They're going to leave their little obscure village in the middle of nowhere, and then they're going to find a magical object, and they're going to build a group of companions, and then they're going to have all of these different challenges. Some they might just scrape through by the skin of their teeth. Others, oh, they could lose a friend along the way, but ultimately they're going to face down against this thing and restore order to the world. Like, which fantasy series was I just describing?
I thought
Pick
you were talking
one of
about
Many,
mine,
many.
maybe. You're talking about the Adan trilogy again?
and it's a very comfortable pattern. And we're not so much interested then in what is going to happen. We're interested in how it is happening because we're comfortable now. We've already projected the shape of it. We know roughly where it is going. We're interested, we're going to follow along with this, and there aren't going to be that many surprises. What we want is something slightly different or different enough from what we've read before, but not so radically different that we're made uncomfortable. Because for a lot of us, when like at the end of the day and you're tired and you've been working all day and you've been reading all of this stuff for work, one of the last things that maybe you want to do that evening is sit down with a book that is challenging your assumptions about how narrative functions, how narration functions, the shape and structure of stories. There are other times, and so in that moment, you might want something that is, oh, look, he's a super spy, and ultimately he's going to defeat the bad guy, and there's going to be lots of action in it. And he'll get the girl at some point, and she'll probably die, and then he'll get another one. You know how it's going to happen, or you know the general shape of it. And what you're interested in are the surface level details, the variations, the playing on this one particular thing. But there are other times when you sit down and you go, right, I've read all of these different books. I want something slightly different.
Hmm.
And this is challenging those norms. And when we see something that challenges the norms, that has the potential to create new things within the genre, as opposed to what people go, oh, it's so generic, it's so formulaic, it's just tropes. And again, very surface level labels stuck on things. But when we have that aspect and this idea of the ending shaping the whole thing,
Hmm.
with the Malazan Book of the Fallen, it's that ending asks us who are the fallen, because we can make the assumption the historical text, the
Yeah.
Book of the Fallen, the Napoleonic text, that's obviously being evoked in the title, and it's about soldiers who have died. And here we have quite a focus in Gardens of the Moon at the very beginning. There's a whole load of soldiers died, so it's about the ramifications of that. And then it's about fallen characters and potentially redemption. So there's another play on it. And then we realize that another way of referring to the crippled god is the fallen god. So it's the book of the person who fell,
Yeah.
of this character. And then we think about if it's about redemption or potential redemption, potential forgiveness, empathy, compassion, all of these things. You don't extend those to paragons of virtue. You extend them to the fallen.
Yes.
So this
Yes.
is all a questioning of how far do you go? Is understanding someone's position the same as forgiving them the position?
Hmm.
Is saying, I understand how they got to that. I can see that whole sequence of events that made them do that. Does that make me forgive them? You're like, no, you don't necessarily forgive. It investigates the consequences of cycles of violence. And yeah, people, because of cycles of violence, do horrendous things. But if you want to stop the cycle of violence, if you want to stop these things from happening, you have to understand the cycle of violence is involved, that the past is
Yeah.
involved. So You can't just go, they did horrible things, punish them. Because you've left the systemic generator of those things. So again, a
Well,
lot of
that's what I think
this,
is so cool. That's what I think is so cool is that he's clearly formulating compassion as a thing that requires a leap beyond where you're comfortable. And you can't really take that leap about the crippled God
Hmm.
until the moment that until that end, and you're following with Tavor, and you're challenged by her as well. And it's just so brilliant to me that the moment you see into Kamensad's, you you say, I'm going to take the leap and see from Kamensad's point of view, is the moment when you learn the story is from his point of view. Like that to me is just a brilliant. And also there's the series has open endings and closed endings, so it isn't a perfectly pat ending
No.
where good defeats evil. It's certainly not, but it's also, I do think that the satisfaction you get from that, like what is essentially a narrative clicking into place, is, I don't know how to describe it. I think it's beautiful. It's more than just like these provisional endings that you kind of get in Grimdark, where you have to you have characters who haven't defeated everything, but they've made some meaning for themselves. It's sort of like the distinction that I've heard Philip make between existential fantasy and transcendental fantasy,
Hmm.
where it's almost as if the narrative itself in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is giving you that transcendental feeling by saying, I've given you this beautiful whole that you didn't see, and I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just
Does.
it was a
Yeah.
very beautiful and satisfying feeling.
Not only does that ending transform how we perceive the crippled god, but I think you mentioned Tavor as well, and I think it transforms how we see her
Yeah.
as the individual who understood the crippled god long before the rest of us, you know. And then we get what she was doing all this time, and it becomes a sacrifice. It becomes something beautiful and sublime in that moment, something incredible. And I think that's also a beautiful aspect of this, how that
And
ending. Yeah, go
what is
ahead.
that feeling? What is that feeling you're feeling with her on that march through the you're feeling about her on the march through the Lether, through the Lether continent?
Yeah.
It is such a, like, that's a challenging thing as a reader to sit with, and I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it
Hmm.
wasn't pleasant, so to speak, because in the same way that it probably wasn't pleasant for a lot of those people on that march. And he stretches it to the limit, where you're just like, what is going on here? Where is she taking us?
Yeah.
We're thirsty. We're so thirsty, for answers, but also for actual water in the case of the characters.
Yep.
That was a really, really cool feeling to feel, that I don't feel that I get from a lot of fiction, period.
and but that it's interesting because that happened in an earlier book. If you remember in Dead House
Yes.
Gates with the chain of dogs,
Yep.
and
Yes.
but you will get some readers who will say it went on to, like, I get it, like we're just walking. Like, what's the point? And that's how they've responded to it. But I think a lot of people recognize that Erikson was trying, through how it was being relayed and how it was stretched out, to get the reader to identify more with the experience. Not just
Yes.
this thing happened, but this is how this thing feels. Now, for obviously for some, that is going to be frustrating because that's not what they want. And you're like, yeah, that's fine.
But it is frustrating. But that's
And
okay.
Right.
and that's the thing. So, like, one of the criticisms I heard of Tavor, when she eventually uses Mil's knife to get the water, it's like, why didn't she do it earlier? And it's anyone who's ever asked that question, I immediately think you have never played an online or a computer RPG where you've picked up health potions, and when by the time you finish the game, you have like 100 of them stacked in your inventory. because you're always holding on to it, going, well, I could just about survive this. I don't need to take it right now. And you hold on and you hold on until you absolutely desperately need to use it. Um, if you're walking through a desert of whatever kind and you don't know how long it's going to take for you to get there, to get to your destination, you hold on until you absolutely cannot hold on any longer, that you have now reached breaking point. And trying to gauge when that breaking point is, that's difficult. Because you don't know, oh, well, everyone's a bit thirsty and we've kind of run out of water. You're like, okay, do it now. And then 3 days later, okay, everyone's died because we completely ran out of water again.
Yeah.
It's
It,
That,
similar to the chain of sorry, Philip. Sorry.
oh yeah, no, you were going to talk about Chain of Dogs, and I was going to bring up the snake, and I think there's
Yes.
similar elements. You can almost look at Dead House Gates as foreshadowing a lot of what happens at the end of the series. But with the snake, a lot of people are like, "What the heck is this? What does it have to do with anything?" The snake is all about the stakes of this story, and it also ties in with the Fork Rule Assail, which is all about this vision of justice, this vision of this crime has been committed, therefore this is the consequence, versus this exploration of compassion, which is what Tavor is all about. So I think that these things just snap into focus, like you've been saying. Oh, this is what the snake is all about. It's about this exploration of compassion versus justice, and I just think it's brilliant. But obviously, again, the parallels in this, talking about the
Yeah.
structure and how what happens in Dead House Gates in so many ways parallels and foreshadows what happens in Dust of Dreams and the Crippled God. So, what were you going to say about
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, the snake really hits. Uh, I have a 1-year-old, and it really
Yeah,
hits
yeah,
differently. I think if I had read this before, um, but the Chain of Dogs, it's so similar in that you don't get the POV into Coltane either,
mm,
right? And so you I found myself many times saying, just sacrifice these goddamn nobles, like, but in the same way that I am also Blistig in the March with Tavor.
yeah.
Like, I am that person.
What the
And I
heck are you
think,
doing? Yeah,
yes. And there is a frustration in the Chain of Dogs, but it's a similar, he does this with the leaders. He doesn't give you the POVs of the leaders. Like Lysine,
right.
we don't get a POV. Anamander Rake, we don't get a POV. And Coltane and Tavor, we don't get POVs. And it is the readers reaching out for some reassurance,
Yeah,
and the book not giving it to us. Um, uh, that to me sort of it fits with this idea of, if you're going to have compassion, it requires taking a leap. Like,
yes,
and I won't say a leap of faith, but it's a leap beyond. Like, if you just want to be compassionate to the people that are good and that you like, what's the problem? There's no problem. But it's also another thing to just say that you need to be compassionate for unsavory people. He could have just said that, but he actually makes you feel
yeah,
he makes you feel the need to take that extra step of faith. Just like Fiddler takes that step. He's that faith. He's the opposite of Blistig in that final march. He's got the and I really appreciate the way that Erikson does that, as opposed to just telling us these things. He really makes you feel it.
he shows us what reaching out means. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, I did, and I didn't mind the uncomfortable feelings.
Hmm.
Like, I did, but I didn't. It's like, that's why these books change so much after you read them.
Mm.
They really do. And I don't know what that is, but there is something about his writing where it just, even a book that, like, for me, Reaper's Gale was a somewhat difficult book, but
Mm.
it's just kind of been ringing in my head afterwards, and like, I won't say that I cried when Coltane died, but I have a loop, like a cinematic loop of the arrow going into his head, like, in my brain, and it's like I can't get it out.
neither could
um,
Colton.
that's too
Hey
soon.
P, hey
That's too
P.
soon. That's too soon.
But when you think of that moment of Coltane's death, how do you feel about Squint?
That's the
Because
one.
Yes.
That's what
that's
made
the
me
one you
cry.
feel. that's the one you feel massive compassion for.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how shaping the focus of a narrative. Because you would think Coltane's going to be at the heart of it. Coltane's going to be at the heart of it. It's all about Coltane's death. And you go, but that death derives meaning from how it impacts other people.
Mm.
Uh,
including us. I
Yes.
mean,
and
really.
Evan, there was something you brought up there about like a lot of the leader characters within the series that we either get very limited glimpses of their points of view or we don't get their point of view at all. It's almost all external. And what's fascinating about that is again this challenging the notion of the great figures of history or the great men of history sort of theory that it's these leaders did these things. But in this book, we see that this character of the leader is constructed by how that leader is perceived,
Mm.
both by the readers seeing the actions, but how other characters are reacting and how the other characters see them. So we see this construction of myth making and legend and heroic status as it is happening, as it progresses. Coltane, look at how Duiker views Coltane at the very beginning
Yeah.
to how Duiker looks at him with worship in his eyes about this God among men. But that is not how Duiker started at the beginning. Duiker is cynical, he is critical, he is dismissive. And Duiker's journey to belief with the chain of dogs is the reader's journey to belief with the chain of
Yes,
dogs. And we do
that's
that
that's
through
it.
witnessing, which obviously comes up as another big thing. Um, so I think that's a really interesting observation about this perception of the person defining the person. And then as soon as you change point of view, is it still the same person then because now perception is shaping them a different way? And how we construct these complex individuals out of implied reasoning, implied characteristics, misunderstandings of what the person did or why they did it. And Erikson almost always includes at least one character who is questioning who we would think would be the hero, but there's one character questioning it because those are the questions the reader has. It's giving voice to it. It's giving the reader's perspective, challenging that notion of authority, and of course they know everything because the reader will have those issues, and so then it explores that and the different ramifications. Not everyone is a Duiker. Not everyone ends up believing. And so again, it's about exploring the multiple ways it ends up. Not just this is what always happens.
Yeah.
No, it's here's one way that it happened. Here's a different way of a very similar thing, but you can see the outcome is different.
Sometimes you
And
get a Blistig, or sometimes you have a Karsa who is so very certain in his
Yeah,
worldview and ends up shattered, right? Uh,
yeah,
the tattoo he ends up with on his face speaks for his inner state, I think, in many ways, where his certainty gets shattered, and yet he still seems to represent a more rigid form, like what he does with Bidethal, and the punishment he metes out there is more of like an eye for an eye kind of morality there.
yeah,
And yet you see that Karsa has been shaken from that first certainty he had, that vision he had of the world that he got from his grandfather, that he went out into the big world. He's a kind of a farm boy in a way, Karsa, isn't he? Going out into the world. I mean, a very big, strong farm boy, but yeah. What were you going to
I
say?
mean, it is
Go ahead, Evan.
that's why I'm excited to read the Witness books, because
Yes.
what I love is the about the series generally is just how things don't ever sort of disappear, and the consequences of actions
Yep.
like Coltane. The choice to have the Wiccans be sacrificial lambs to the Empire
Yeah.
at the end of the Bone Hunters is such a devastating thing, because of what we went through with the Wiccans on the Chain of Dogs.
Yeah.
And it's so funny how he doesn't have to revisit characters specifically. Like, we don't need to be back in POVs with people, but they live on throughout the series. And Coltane is alive up until the very end. I mean,
Mm.
as long as you're with Tavor, you're with Coltane, in my opinion, in terms of
Mm.
like the way the reader thinks. And I do love that. And so I'm excited to see how he explores it even further with. I assume we're going back to the place where Karsa started and Silver Lake and all that stuff. So
You're going
You
to
can
see
I'm
make as
excited.
repercussions.
make as many assumptions as you want because you told us that we're not allowed to tell you. So
You're going to see repercussions.
Spoil
Big
it.
time. Big time.
so
Big time. Yeah.
there is an interesting thing that comes up, and it was like earlier on I was going to start talking about it, but we went on an interesting thing about perception of the leaders and things.
Yeah.
But the concept of the mosaic novel and
Yeah.
a related concept almost of fractal storytelling. So if you think a mosaic novel is usually made up of individual short stories that don't appear to have a link between them. So unlike a bind up where each of the short stories is kind of meant to be stuck together, the mosaic novel, you have a whole sequence of individual short stories. And once you've completed the whole sequence and then you think about them, you suddenly realize that each of them have kind of rearranged to give you a picture of a different thing, much like a mosaic, where each individual tile might be a little picture or a color or something. And you go, oh, that's really beautiful. Oh, that's really interesting. But then once you see all of them and you take that step back and think of all of them together, you realize it's actually a picture of something else.
Mm.
Yeah.
And was it Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio is
Yeah.
the typical example that American students are given,
I was
where
thinking,
you get all of these
would
short
Jennifer
stories.
Egan's Welcome to the Goon Squad be considered that mosaic?
Probably, and there's a relationship obviously between mosaics and bind ups and this sort of collection
Yeah.
of short stories that have narrative connectivity put through them to make them
Yeah.
more novel like. But um, in that, you have all of these short stories about things that happen in
Yeah.
Winesburg, Ohio, where certain characters appear in one. They might appear as a background character in a different story, but not necessarily the next one. But by the end of it, you suddenly have a sense of this world, this town, this picture. And it's remarkable because it's only by completing it all that you get that overview. But it doesn't necessarily change the intrinsic meaning of each individual one in a vacuum. But it's once they're put in conversation with one another, you realize that there's like all of these other levels. So if we think of that as a basic framework by analogy to the Malazan Book of the Fallen, where each character point of view is almost like their own short story. And each short story is fitted into an individual novel. Because if we think about it, none of the novels are the same as other novels. There's
Right.
no expectation of this book is going to be like this book. When we start talking that way, we suddenly go, they're all kind of individual, that they're these quite distinct novels. And some of them use very different structures, some of them use different approaches, some of them have very different humor. But one of the things that we see are recurrent patterns, this idea of the fractal storytelling. And we've picked up on
Yeah.
one of them, which is this the marching of people.
Yeah.
And we've seen it multiple times.
Hmm.
And each time it's almost like taking that pattern and repeating it, but repeating it in a different context so the pattern appears different. And then when we think of our own journey through the entire series, that's being embedded onto it. And then suddenly we start seeing this idea of this journey of suffering. And you start making the abstract connections to what life is. You start making different connections to other things because we start thinking about it symbolically rather than just literally what happened, the surface level information. So the treatment of um, sexual assault within the series.
Mm.
And it's a very sensitive, very hot button, very emotive issue. And people see it happen in one book and they go, oh, this is terrible. And then it happens again. And they go, oh, look, he's just going to the same well. But what happens to Fellison is very different to what happens to uh,
Hinton.
Heaton.
Heta
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what happens to Jana or
Yeah.
Tehol's
Janaf.
uh,
Yeah.
Janath,
Yeah.
and what happens to the Aquator. That
Saren.
yes,
Saren. Yeah.
Saren Pedak.
Oh
Yeah.
What
yeah.
happens to each of them is different, but the reactions of the other characters around them are different, showing us a different way that this thing that happens, this terrible thing that happens,
Hmm.
is not always treated the same way. And if you feel that that way was wrong, and this is one of the things that people say quite often in an initial read of Dead House Gates, why didn't they just use magic to heal her?
Hmm.
And you go, okay, look at what happens for that when we see that happening to Janeth and how you feel about it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about what happens to her when it's just magically waved away?
Yeah.
Or what happens to Siren when it's, yeah, we're going to use magic, but I'm not going to use magic on you. I'm going to show you how you can use magic to heal yourself.
Hmm.
That um, each time it's not about this is the right way to treat it. It's more these are different ways that we think
Yeah.
about it. A lot of the criticisms of Fellowson. Oh, why can't she be more likable? Why can't she just get over it? Like I dislike her. She's whiny. She's horrible. She's mean. She's nasty. Yeah. And the failure that we have to give over empathy, understanding, and forgiveness to people we don't like, or people who hurt us, or people who act in ways that we don't like,
Yeah.
without trying to understand their position.
The mosaic
Yeah,
picture too is
definitely.
the mosaic picture is thematic too. Like I think that's what I was trying to get at is that it's not necessarily an ending. It's not necessarily, it has the battles, it has the big battles and the things you might expect, but nothing is really, as far as the greater world is concerned, like there's still a lot left to be dealt with. It's, if it is a book of history, the book of the fallen, if that's what it's meant to be, it's a remarkably good history in the sense that it's not like teleological. It's not leading to some kind of end, and
Yeah.
I think that's what I am also getting at in terms of Erikson's his modernism or postmodernism, his ability to give you characters that aren't stock characters. And in fact, I mean, please tell me if this is wrong, but I read that he gamed a lot of the, like for example, he gamed a lot of what happened in the final scrap with uh, uh, with the Fork Roll Sail at those squads uh, in the Crippled God. Um, and that I thought was super interesting because it's almost like you're giving it up a little bit to the gaming process in a way. Obviously, he shapes it afterwards. It made me think of Philip K. Dick using the I Ching to write some of the Man in the High
Man in
Castle.
High Castle.
Yeah, yeah, and so I love this. I love the realism of the history. And we're learning some things, but we're not learning other things. It's
Hmm.
we're not moving necessarily towards a greater future. We are in some ways, we aren't in some other ways. But the thematic ending is beautiful. Like it's something that we, the reader, feel, but the characters still have to go on and live and deal with the things that they did. The consequences are still going to be obviously in the other books, but just generally in the story world are going to go on forever and ever. And we don't ever get the sense that we've hit the end of like an era, you know.
My
Well,
impression in general is that while Erikson and Essamont definitely did game this world together and create a lot of the characters and whatnot, that the degree to which the stories that we read were things that they actually gamed is probably not quite true. Like they're not, to me, it's exaggerated a bit, but AP would have more
Yeah.
inside knowledge of that than I do, I think.
I I would say I think it is both that the impact of the gaming is both overstated and understated in a way that people don't understand. So to give you an example, if you think back to Gardens of the Moon, part of that was gamed, but there are certain characters who were never part of that game that then get added into the narrative because it was written as part of it was developed for a screenplay. So the narrative events were altered and shaped because of the introduction of new characters who weren't in the game. So you had the game went this way. Then it's like, right, we're going to turn it into a film. So we have to tweak things. So already we're
Yeah.
diverging from the narrative events of the game. Then we add in new characters, which changes dialogue, character reaction, even if the general shape is very similar to what ultimately happened in the game. And then when Erikson comes to novelize it, he didn't novelize the screenplay. He went, right, these are the events, these are the characters. I am now going to write this as a novel, part of this. And so a lot of what I think gaming has influenced within it is not these specific things that happen,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
rather how Erikson thinks about and adapts to characters doing things that are just weird and thinking of the ramifications. But
yeah,
that
yeah,
training in gaming, where as a DM or a GM, and you go, here's my outline for the thing that the players are going to go on, and then the players just go off on this tangent. You're like, right, let's go with this. Let's adapt to it. And sometimes you can kind of steer them back thematically to where you want to go.
yeah, yeah.
That's a lot of what influenced Erikson. That and his love of bizarre names. That he uses names to hang characters off of. But when it comes to, and a lot of people talk about Dassam versus Rick, that fight, and how it was decided with a dice throw. And you're like, yeah, but if it had ended the other way, we'd have gotten an entirely different book. It's not like this happened and then the whole sequence that we had in Toll the Hounds happened. That's not what happened, because that wasn't when they got to there in their gaming.
But if it ended another way, would we have gotten a different book?
Yeah,
No, well, my take on that
Because
is Erikson
yeah,
has talked about his writing, and he was very clear when he had this discussion with, I think, both of us, AP. He starts with theme. Theme is the thing that he builds the story over. It's like a boulder in the landscape that's been covered by grass and stuff, but you can see the mound there, but things are built over it. So I think we would get the same story in the sense that these are the themes he's going to explore.
yeah,
Now, maybe the events would be different.
yeah, that's what I mean. You would get a different book
Yeah,
in that. But
that's what I'm
for
asking. Yeah,
the confrontation between Rake and Dassam, what led up to it in the gaming is radically different to what led up to it
in the
in the
book.
book.
Yeah,
The ramifications within the gaming were different from the ramifications within the book. The
yeah,
event occurred, that event in the game was decided with a dice throw. But what that event means for the narrative that Erikson was creating is entirely different. It's explored in a way that wasn't in the game. But people seem to think, oh, because the thing happened, he's just writing up his game notes. You're like, no.
no,
It's a bit like when you look at a history of World War II and you go, oh, that battle happened. Okay, so I know the outcome of the battle. Now I'm going to write a story about it. And you're going to focus on different characters. You're going to have all of these conversations. And you go, oh, well, I know theoretically 3 tanks came in via that gate, but it's going to be more impressive if it's this 1 tank, because it's going to be this one-on-one battle. So you change things, but you still use the event as the basis and jumping
yeah,
off point. And that's why I think people overestimate what came from the gaming and underestimate it's more about how the gaming shaped reactions to things and explorations of things, and not being tied down into a very fixed format of formulaic story, predictable arc, plot coupon collecting.
that's what I'm asking. I mean, that
yeah,
is really what I'm asking. Is that because my larger point about history, you know, he does a remarkable job at making it feel like real history, in that people don't just do formulaically what you would expect them to do. Things go
mm,
sideways. And I guess the question about the gaming is some of that spontaneity and randomness preserved in the story? Now, you could write that too, and I'm sure it all goes together.
huh.
But there is this beautiful sense that really anything could happen. I
Yeah.
mean,
Just as chaos surrounds the Warrens, there's this chaos
yes,
element, yeah, in this series. But speaking of Dassam versus Rake, I do want to talk about Toll the Hounds specifically. I don't think you can have a discussion about the structure of the Malazan Book of the Fallen and not at least delve a little bit into Toll the Hounds because Erikson has said it's the cipher to the series and all of that, and we can AP will explain what that means, I'm sure. But I
He's
also
got a great video explaining what that means.
yes, he
Highly
does. Yes.
recommended.
Excellent videos, actually. Not only on that, but how each of these books is unique in its structure. You mentioned that as well, AP, that you have The Crippled God, which recontextualizes everything. You have Gardens of the Moon, which could be read as a prologue, really, to the series. It introduces a lot of what Erikson is telling the reader, hey, this is some of the stuff I'm going to be doing here. Be on the lookout, for the rest of the series. But Toll the Hounds is also unique, and maybe in my mind at least the most unique of the books in the series. Although
Philip, you cannot
I
stretch
know,
the
I
word
know, you knew
unique
you were
in
going to
that
say
way.
that as soon as it came out of my mouth. I knew you were going to go there. Yeah, I'm going to use the word decimate too, AP, just to piss
Oh,
you off. So anyway, that we
You
won't do
mean
that.
to reduce by 1/10 or something?
Exactly. You can only use that word in AP's presence if you mean exactly 1/10 of what used to be there. Yeah. But anyway, as far as Toll the Hounds goes, this is a story that is to me one of the most beautiful explorations of the intertwining of love and grief. But you also have this unique aspect of it, which sticks out to me, having Krupp doing a lot of the narrating. So what was Erikson up to? And how did you react to that, Evan, as well? Like, what were your thoughts
Well,
as you were reading Toll the Hounds?
my first question is when a character refers to themselves in the third person
Okay.
and they're narrating a story, does that mean that it's first person?
That's
um, but I obviously similarly to how you can imagine the chain of dogs part of Deadhouse Gates as Diker's story to the people in the bar and in Memories of Ice, and you could think of Midnight Tides as Troll's story from House of Chains. This is just a third more overt example of that, where you go one level down and have uh and this is all really from reading and AP's video as well. It is an example in miniature of what we're getting of the whole story. Of the way AP described it, I remember is like a guest director on a TV series,
yeah.
which I really like. And I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be like, so it still exists with these questions are probably immaterial, but it still exists within Kamen-Sad's story. But obviously Krupp as the character who can move through the diegetic levels, maybe he doesn't, maybe he can alter things from even outside of that. Um, but I think it's beautifully done. And I really really loved the way like I like being in Krupp's language.
Uh-huh.
It's a very exuberant language. And I enjoyed that counterpoint to what can be a very sad book.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I mean, I love Toll Hounds.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, if you think the reason we know that Krupp is a narratorial voice within Toll the Hounds is we have that scene of him with a campfire and him
Yes.
saying, and watch Krupp dance. Who was narrating that? And you go, the person narrating that is Kamensod, if we're going to go person as narrator. But that's so Kamensod is saying, right, this what we're about to read is Krupp's version of the events. How Krupp would tell it, how Krupp would explore it. But does it matter that Kamensod or that Krupp was the one that wrote it down and gave it to Kamensod? Or does it matter that Kamensod imagined how Krupp would tell the story and told it in Krupp's sort of manner? Does it make a difference whether Krupp actually does it or whether someone is imitating and framing it as this is how Krupp would do it? So if you're writing a Lovecraftian story, you say this is how Lovecraft would do it, and you write it in Lovecraft style, and you say that this was a story that he wanted to tell,
Hmm.
and it mimics Lovecraft style. You go, yeah, you're not Lovecraft. No one is saying that you're Lovecraft, but is it still a Lovecraftian story because it's written in that style? So we get to this idea of, again, perception of truth, authenticity, and validity.
Yes.
Because people then go, well, how did Krupp know these things? And you're like, have you ever heard anyone tell a story about something that happened to them? They fill in the blanks all the time. They automatically make connections. They will tell you what someone was thinking, even though they are physically not a mind reader. They will do all of these things because that's what we do. So we have,
And that's the imaginative empathetic leap too. That's why I really
Yes.
love third person limited as a choice, as Kaminsad's choice and Erikson's choice, because he does have, you do get into the thought. Like he does it a few different ways. So he has like free and direct discourse
Mhm.
at times, and then he has the italicized, like, reported thought, I guess you would call that.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's moving in a spectrum closer or slightly farther, but you have to make an empathetic leap to get into other characters. So whether or not he knew it, he obviously can't know what's in the minds of people. I guess as omniscient God, he could, but he
but
is making a leap.
we
Hmm.
don't know if Common Sword is omniscient. But you had
Yes.
mentioned their free and direct discourse, and one of the issues with this as a term, because obviously it kind of came up, particularly talking about Jane Austen style is one of the common examples. But free and direct discourse, when we think about it, is actually it's multiple different techniques,
Yeah.
because you have internal monologue. That is part of free and direct discourse, but you can also have free and direct discourse, which is the focalization of exposition from the character's point of view
Right.
through their psychology. Those
Right.
are both elements of free and direct discourse.
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons why when academics go, well, here's this thing. Well, actually, we've broken it down into multiple things within it.
Right.
Because if you think focalization, the telling of a story from a perspective and psychology, is different to internal monologue, quite radically different.
Right.
Like one of the examples I like to use about this is if you imagine Glotka from
First of all,
Abercrombie's First Law,
yeah.
First law. Yeah.
and Glotka goes, "Oh, there are stairs." How Glotka thinks of stairs. So he walks into a room and there are stairs going out of it. So as soon as he walks into that room, that piece of information is going to be one of the first things he notices because he hates having to walk upstairs. But you have Logan walk into the same room.
Right.
He might notice swords on the wall or daggers hanging somewhere because that's where his focus is going. So
You never have too many knives.
if you're focalizing through a character, that can actually shape perception of the room, order of importance of information, and even how they think about it. Whereas when you think of internal monologue, those are the thoughts that pop into their head
Right.
and how they think, which again, we can then think of, oh, where you just stream of
Yeah.
consciousness as this writ large, but again, it's following a different patterning. So
It made me think,
when we consider,
why did he use the italicized? At times he goes for the italicized thoughts.
but italicization within this context is
Mhm.
what he is actually thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like direct thought, right?
That's monologue. That's monologue, as opposed to
Okay.
focalization, which is where the character's voice bleeds into the narrator's voice. And so when it's the narrator, it's not Glockta talking or Logan talking, but somehow it feels like their personality has bled into the narrative voice. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So again, you have a narrator is describing what a room looks like, and describing the action. Glotka opens the door ahead, an infernal staircase.
Right. Yeah.
And you go, a narrator isn't going to describe it as an infernal staircase. Glotka would
Yeah.
describe it that way. It's
Yeah.
Glotka's feeling about it that has influenced the narrative description. Logan walks into the room, and it's thankfully enough knives to keep me going. Like this sort of,
Right.
Yeah.
and that might be internal monologue. But if he walks, it's Logan opened the door. weapons lined every wall. And it's the same room that Glocka walked into, but the first thing Logan notices is the weapons because it's how he thinks. So again, his
Beak
psychology.
at one point says, "Scary Captain Woman," referring to Faradan's sword. You know,
Yeah.
that's Beak. You know, that's Beak melding with the narrator.
And so we have this playfulness with what is true of the character, what the character is thinking, what is true of how the character would think about a thing, because those are two distinct elements. And it's one of the reasons why free and direct discourse, well, it's a good general term to talk about like the overall concept of character influencing description, exposition, and reaction. But when we start breaking it down, we actually want to think about it in very specific ways because, again, they generate different effects. They're used for different purposes.
Yeah.
And so, Krupp speaking is not the same as Krupp thinking and is not the same as Krupp feeling because Krupp doesn't narrate as he speaks until we do get moments where sort of Krupp's speech invades what has been narrated. Because you can take passages of Toll the Hounds and you can compare it to passages from the other books. There's very little distinction
Mm.
in word choice, but what is distinct possibly more is tone.
Yeah, well,
And
Krupp does something different though, doesn't he? Because he does almost like he does something that that Kamensa doesn't do, which is he does like a bird's eye view sometimes of things,
Mm.
and it feels almost like a kind of like a Victorian narrator, where that the narrator character is actually I guess he would be homodiegetic, but he's doing a more omniscient he's doing a more omniscient thing many times than Kamensan ever chooses to do.
yeah, but
Right?
Kamenson still uses omniscience at
No,
certain
I know,
points.
yeah.
And so it's so again when Erikson talks about um Toll the Hounds being a cipher. We can talk about it being a cipher thematically. We can talk about it being a cipher in terms of the structure. We can talk about it being a cipher in terms of a lot of the techniques. And we can talk about it being a cipher in terms of levels of ambiguity and the construction of narrative truth versus factual truth. And it operates on multiple levels as a way of explaining things. And I think, you know, Gardens of the Moon is almost equally good but less obvious as a cipher because essentially Gardens of the Moon acts in vitro of almost all of these things.
Yeah.
That it is showcasing the different elements and the ambiguity about fact, truth, reality, storytelling, perspective, like all of those things. We see all of it in Gardens of the Moon. So I think it works in vitro as this is what the series is. But Toll the Hounds is you've gotten to here. I am now confirming for you all of those things that you have suspected up until this point because we're about to launch into the end game.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways this is Erikson's setting everything up to go. You now have all of these pieces to experience this cap that fits on the end. That once you have that, you will step back and you will see the whole picture and know to step back and see the whole picture.
Yeah.
If you think not every series asks you when you reach the end to take a step back and have a retrospective. A lot of them,
Yeah.
you've reached the end and this happened and they lived happily ever after. You know, and it ends. It's you might even have that denouement of and this is how everything shook out and then they all lived happily ever after. But it doesn't ask you at that point to go, hang on, stop here. Now look back at the
Yeah.
journey we have gone on.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the insistence of that capping and why Toll the Hounds as a necessity comes up
Mm.
before that cap.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant.
And a lot of stories broadcast the ending way early.
Yep.
And that's not something we get here.
Looking at you, Wheel of Time.
Oh, I mean, like Lord of the Rings,
Sure.
the ring is going to be destroyed or not destroyed. I mean,
Yeah.
there's two options, and you're pretty sure what it's going to be. And there are other enjoyments to be had about that.
Yeah,
But that
well,
is not
my dig at Wheel of
what
Time
they're
is
calling
because
it.
time is cyclical. And if the heroes win, it continues to be cyclical. So the
Oh,
same thing's just gonna happen again. And I'm like, you built
Yeah.
it into your story world.
uh-oh.
People have to be allowed to poke fun of it every once in a while.
Yeah. Have we, but deja vu, a lot of deja vu in that world. Yeah. But yeah, we haven't even talked about every book having its own prologue. Of course, AP has a brilliant series on the prologues of each of the books. So definitely head to his channel, Critical Dragon, for those. But and I mentioned briefly how earlier we have all these epigraphs and poems and everything else that is all part of the structure of this, the various levels of narrative structure we have in here. But is there anything else you wanted to talk about, either Evan or AP, before we finish our discussion?
I mean, I could go on, and because I just love talking with you, I feel like I love this series, and I
Yeah.
so so much fun just chatting about it with you. Um, so I just want to say thanks.
Yeah. But we'll have to do it again as you read
Yeah.
more. You know, if you end up reading novels of the Malazan Empire or the Carcanis books or the Witness books or whatever you want, please come back and chat with us. So yeah, AP, anything you want to add to for the good of the order?
Only that people should continue to remember that you're the evil nemesis and I'm the innocent, pure-hearted.
Finally, finally, I was so confused by who was the nemesis of who,
Except Evan, I need to tell you, you might be dealing with an unreliable narrator here.
but
Well,
not an unreliable, omniscient narrator.
Yes,
Hardly.
that's even scarier. But yes.
I am open and honest about being a grumpy individual. Philip, on the other hand, creates this whole persona that he's so nice and so friendly when we know he tortures puppies and makes students cry and beats up pigeons.
Random one.
Pigeons?
Pigeons aren't that cute. They're kind of creepy.
See? But he hides it all under niceness. So who is truly the evil one? Him.
The
No, I'm not.
fiction is better than the reality.
It's true. I have I have the elbow patches, AP. I'm immune to all of this. So
Listen, Hobbit boy. The fact that you raised your seat up to make yourself look taller.
this is another myth that has been perpetrated by the unreliable narrator.
This is why I really wanted to come. I mean, I really wanted to see this up close and personal. You know, it's one thing to watch it, it's another thing to be here for it.
Yeah. Well, you see why I have to wear this protective tweed. Now you know.
It's armor.
It's armor, fireball proof. So, but this has been a delight. I want to thank you both and thank all the people watching this who've gotten this far. I'll have links to both channels, A Critical Dragon and Nerdwriter 1. And if you're for some reason not familiar, if you've been around here, you know who AP is, but he does brilliant stuff over there at A Critical Dragon and deep dives into narrative structure and brilliant explanations of various aspects of storytelling. And yeah, he talks about all kinds of good stuff. And of course, Evan there at Nerdwriter 1 does all kinds of really cool, just really, I mean, we don't really do much on the technical side, AP and I, but if you want to watch really polished, professional, beautiful videos that actually make you think about various culturally related topics, you need to check out. And they're speaking of pithy, they're only like 8, 9 minutes long usually, but they're just brilliant and thought-provoking. So do check out Nerdwriter 1 if for some reason you're not aware of that channel. But thanks everybody for being here, and until next time.